Banning something is okay, I suppose, for some reason, but if you do it on a grand scale, you are going to fail in a grand scale. We know where it's going to end. We have to address the problem domestically. If you don't increase productivity, you can't sustain. Bite the bullet and make the changes that need to be changed. What is meant by industrial policy is the collection of policies that deal with industry. So there are two schools there. That's one of the main points that I will be making today. One is school that uses the term industrial policy means mostly, or most of the time, government interference in the economy in a way to promote some part of the GDP, but most of the time it is to promote industry in this case. Then there's the other side of the people use the term policy towards the industry, which is different, where the policy is largely directed at a private sector, assuring macroeconomic stability, sustainable balance of payments, an enabler rather than a direct interferer in the system. That's the main difference between the two. So the distinction between policy towards industry and industrial policy is that industrial policy, to start with the second, is a more active role for the government. So for example, public officials will promote certain areas depending on their view. Does the government want to do this? So it is more like a bureaucracy-driven operation. Whereas industrial policy, the way that we mean, is policy towards industry, is where the choice is made by the private sector. Now there are exceptions to this. It doesn't mean to say that the government abdicates its role from the economy. No, government only deals with providing better macroeconomic environment, sustainable in terms of price stability and external stability. But government can intervene in what we can come to later, we are going to discuss, called in the case of infant industries. Industries on their own will never be started, so the government can address that type of quote-unquote distortion in the system. So to help a company, a firm, to establish itself for a limited period of time with a sundown clause, so that after a certain while, if they cannot manage, they close down. Whereas industrial policy of the first kind that we talked about, the term industrial policy means continuous support. That's what we have also done in our country. But countries who succeeded with policy toward industry switched off. They said, hey, we promise to help you here because of this distortion, we address that, it's up to you now. And if you cannot make it, then the system says, then it's a profit and loss system. Losses tell you that you are not suited to, you cannot deal in that market. The government has a more active role under industrial policy, not under policy towards industry. The policies are equal, balanced in the case of the policy towards industry. It's subtle but a very important decision because it only defines the actors involved. Does the government play a very active role? Does the government is playing only a promotional role, meaning providing better macroeconomic situations and dealing with what are called public goods, and also in this case dealing with what are called infant industries. What is meant by infant industry is their lack of consistency by saying you can promote some industries. Actually, there is no lack of consistency. This is not what I say, it's come from the very good economists who have looked at it very closely. There are two famous economists, Robert Baldwin wrote a very famous paper about 20 years ago, and then Max Gordon, who was my teacher once, they look at this argument very closely. So there is a legitimate reason in neoclassical economics for infant industry support. Meaning, if there's some important industry that is needed in the country, it will not get started because the private sector will not be able to either mobilize the resources to do it, or at that rate at that point it will be too risky for them to understand. So the government can come evaluate it and say, yeah, we can support you. How it really works, it's give a definite period in which the support could be extended. We can say for the next 5 years, don't worry about this part, we will help you give money in order to start this industry. And we can help you by other means where there are certain restrictions, and these things they can also get them removed. But it must be a dynamic argument, that is, in the future they must be able to reduce costs. They must convince the people who are allocating the money for the infant industry that there is a genuine case for infant, and that there is a future decline in the cost, so therefore they can be more competitive, and that they have what are called sundown clause, that is, after 5 years they are not going to get any help. This is what South Korea did. South Korea did then set up a couple of enterprises. When the enterprises start losing for the second and third, fourth, fifth year, they said, sorry, we are done, and they withdrew support. Now, in our case, we didn't do that. We created public enterprises during the time of Mr. Bandaranaike and Mrs. Bandaranaike. Very good intentioned people, by the way, good people. And they didn't switch off, they continued to support them. Then it got captured by the politicians. They saw a fine opportunity to reward their friends and relations through giving them jobs as chairman of corporations, give them motor vehicles to run about. And so we kept losing enterprises, public enterprises, that there are certain public, they must be there, they must be there. Nobody denies that. But it's a bit too much, isn't it, to be subsidizing for 30, 40 years. Some enterprise never going to, like Kaju Corporation, somebody, when it was mooted, said, hey, we did a Kaju Corporation, why don't we have Kaju Puhulan Corporation also? So, it based. So, we still have them. Actually, as you know, as we are going to be looking at public enterprises pretty soon to see what is the outcome, to see how we can find ways of rescuing or saying, they must mind their way or leave that industry. What is the theoretical and empirical argument for both sides? Now, if I start with the theory part, now it is well established in economics in the last 50 years or 60 years that the government's interference should be minimized, that the government's role is a more passive role than actively in getting involved, what to produce, how to produce and how to distribute it. Those things, particularly in a capitalist economy like ours, is done through the private sector. The government only interferes when, in the case of infant industries, properly. Now, of course, there is a big challenge how to identify infant industries, and how often, how much, how longer you want to give them to get support, and also be able to have a mechanism that switches off when it is not able to deal with the prices and things that evolve in the market, because it is either that is not suitable to produce in the country, or something has changed in order to get the country into a difficult situation, in which case the government also should help. So, it's not a abject sort of a departure for the government from the market, but being like more like an umpire rather than playing the game. Umpire's role, that's what the government could do under policy towards the industry. Yeah, has there been a big change in among the economists about these issues, whether it is industry policy or policy toward industry? There has been. There has been starting from in the 1950s, most economists thought that free markets were not going to work. They didn't want to let go. We understand that. They didn't want to let go. Even our countries, they didn't want to let go. The government must go there and do all those things. It turned out that if you reduce the role of the government and allow the private sector to make those decisions and take the risk, then they are fully dedicated to it. And if they undertake an investment, they are mindful of the fact that if it's not giving them adequate return, they are not going to get into it. Then there is nobody to come and rescue them. That view sort of came into prominence in the 1960s, middle of 65, in middle of the 60s, in 1965, what are called the East Asian countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore and Hong Kong, abdicated from the market and said, they are on their own, we will help them in an emergency as a government should be, otherwise we leave them alone. They choose where to invest, they choose what to produce, they choose where they are distributing the product inside the country or better even exporting. So that gave a real boost to the East Asian economies. East Asian economies start growing that they have never done before, right? And then what happens is that other countries learn from them. Also they said, look, this works for them. Small countries, not very significant, but they started doing very well, growing 7, 8, 10%. Now some people would say, oh, you are talking about Singapore and Hong Kong, they are small places. True there, but the issue is not size. Issue is what worked, whether it's big or small doesn't matter. So I think, so because of the demonstration, actual demonstration, countries looking around who have got independence now want to be there on their own, and they started partly imitating them and doing well also. Then the countries that were not allowing the market to allocate resources were in trouble. I started with the Soviet Union. It became a very unsuitable system, and so Soviet Union was producing goods, sending things up in satellites and all, but it was not a very well-to-do country outside of the Moscow area. People who visited Soviet during that time have told us that it was outside Moscow, the living standards were pretty low, and they had to sometimes share households in apartments. You have to ask another family to come and allocate, you live there, so situation like that. Now, if you allow the market to allocate, then goods that are going to be produced are that we could produce easily at cheap cost compared to other countries. So right there is an advantage in what is called labor surplus economy like ours compared to capital. Then we are producing goods that are more labor intensive than capital intensive. So right there we are solving our employment problem. Now if you solve our employment problem, we are solving a very important part of poverty problem, because nobody wants to just stay at home. I mean, human nature is that we want to do something. A man in a family wants to earn money for his family. So the opportunity should be given. And so if you liberalize the economy, you give that opportunity to do it, because there is demand for labor and that setup. Now if you are about to control and establish industries that are more capital intensive, then the goods, the employment that is created are little for a labor abundant economy like ours. So right there we have problems there. Not only us, any country that followed would have ended up in the same place. So we need some type of balance between the two. For example, we got free steel factory from the Russians, And it is said that our people who were hired during that time didn't understand the decimal system. So they didn't know how to set the machines properly. And the second thing we learned later was they were used machinery, our friends. So if we had the way, if you allowed, if steel was not ideal for us because we don't have the resource, more than we don't have technical expertise to use it also. We came from this idea from the Indians. Mahalanobis is the famous statistician stroke economist, you can say, said that if you want to grow fast, go and do your heavy industry. Actually, that was a big problem for India. And India also abandoned it later. In 1991, India completely departed from that type of thinking. And so now, of course, India has very well-educated engineers and people from their famous technical institutes. So today, actually, they are helping the rest of the world. They are leading the main activities, big firms in like Microsoft now, and those big firms in the United States. So there's a certain way that economics work, and our education system was very good then. I think it's still good, but what we were doing did not suit the employment situation then. So there was very high unemployment. We have actually a very nice situation to show that, because ours is a small country and this experiment was carried on. So the experiment starts with Mr. Bandaranaike coming into power in 1956. He wanted to have better control of the economy. And he had a great tutor by the name of Jawaharlal Nehru, was his friend. And so he wanted to follow India. India itself was totally against markets. They thought they identified markets as imperialism, very sadly at that time. And so we followed that. And so when Mr. Bandaranaike became Prime Minister, he used to meet him often. Jawaharlal Nehru also advised him to invite some economists to come and advise us. On his advice, there was 7 very famous economists came to Sri Lanka and wrote a book called Papers by publication later called Papers by Visiting Economists. They included famous John R. Hicks, his wife Ursula, very important people in the world at that time, John Galbraith, and they were a bit ambiguous. They didn't identify it once, although one was a very famous minister of Poland, is clearly a man who didn't believe in market, and so at that time we favored direct intervention in the markets in the form of industrial policy. So there is a industry ministry set up, and the ministry's idea is to go and look at the areas and undertake certain investments, advocate, go to the cabinet and say we should do sugar industry, we should do things, without a market test. So that actually there was no penalty to failure in that system. The government is behind you. So what happened was that it didn't work out well. So if you look at the 1970-77 period, I think for economics is the darkest period for the economy. This is under Madam Bandaranaike. Madam Bandaranaike created a coalition with the Communist Party, the LSSP, the People's Mahajan Eksa Perumana of Mr. Philip Gunawardena, which was committed to industrial policy. That's the time they started all the public enterprises. So public enterprises are a very interesting thing to make the point. Public enterprises were created to see that we can solve the problems of the market. We take this over and get it done. Turns out, as we see later, they were the sort of canaries in the mine, and that they perform badly. And today the evidence These are the sort of the remaining evidence of that policy. So we are very interested in this field, in what happened to public enterprises. 1970-77 period and 78 onwards to 94 periods are two very contrasting periods, particularly for in what we are now calling industrial policy, where the government intervened, the Ministry of Industries want to promote industries, actually making investment, deciding what to invest in. And that period we had great difficulty. In fact, our foreign exchange problem became more difficult than before by controlling imports and controlling export in a way that reduced the allocation by the market. And so the decisions where to invest, how much to invest are made by public officials. Public officials, as good as they may be, or may have got very big prizes in the University for Literature and History and all, are not the business people who make that decision properly. So that is, I am not saying economics should have done better, I don't. It should be made by, the decision should be made by people who are risking their money. That is the best test. If people, private sector does it, they are risking their own money. So therefore, they are not going to get into activity unless it gives them rate of return. They have so many choices. They can put their money in a deposit account and just stay at home. But they will make an investment in an area in producing something when it promises a better return than what you can get from the savings, time and savings deposit in a commercial bank. So that is in contrast to the 78 to 94 period when the economy was liberalized. Now, when we say liberalized, it is not allowing free goods to come willy-nilly. Actually, it is liberalization means allowing prices to allocate resources. That's the only thing what it means. Not sort of freedom of the wild ass, you can import anything, you can. No. So under that situation, we did much better. Our growth rate went up to 6, 7%, 8% sometimes. But more importantly, our productivity increased. And the right we got from that liberalization went on till 94, till the people who liberalized themselves got tired of it. As I can talk about that. But we did not continue because ideologically we have a big difference of opinion between one party, major party, and the other major parties. And so, and also we undertook a huge investment program at that time, Mahaveli, which was helpful in the future, but was not a very good investment at that time. We had to do it, but in the future, we sort of rushed it because apparently Mr. Jayajardhan thought this was a way to get foreign aid, without realizing too much foreign aid also created a problem by changing relative prices. And so that right that we got didn't continue because of ideological reason and because it could not have continued because of good economic reasons. Actually, it's not a very pleasant time. We had 3 young children at that time, and we all were, one year apart mostly, and so we had to get milk food. Infant milk is only given 1 tin, 1 per person. Whether you had 3 children or no concern to the bureaucrats, that is the rule. So my people who work with me in the central bank so kindly always came with me, 2 of them at least, to get a tin each. And the moment you buy the tin, you pay cash, buy the tin, they smash it on the floor. So to distort the tin so that you cannot sell it. So it shows the level of control. And so everybody wasted time there were long queues. Prices didn't change and nominal prices did not change. Because the goods are now allocated not during the prices, but so there were long queues. So what you don't see in the inflation index, you can measure by seeing how many people are queuing against getting a pound of bread at that time. So some friends who visited us from the US, so my classmates were visiting us. They sit in the stand in the queue and get bread for themselves also to come bring to our house. So it was a very difficult time, and it could not continue. It could not have continued because people are really sick of it. And so when you start on this control journey, very difficult. I mean, we know where it's going to end. And sometimes the domestic problems in the economy cannot be changed by changing foreign economic relations. You have to address the problem domestically, to go to the target the place where the problem is and deal with it rather than put import controls. Every import control is a tax on exports. People don't seem to understand that in this country. If you put an import control, what you do is that you make the domestic price of that good that you control go up, right? And where do the resources go to support that, to profit-seeking entrepreneurs will invest in that area. And where do you think they got money from? They get the resources from the non-tradable sector, right, like services, electricity and things like that. They are not imported or exported. And resources are moving into the import substitution area. So if you at the same breath you can say we are doing both, we are saving the country from losing reserves, import control by itself cannot be the answer. So what we say is that is in economic theory is very well established now. Now if the problem is internal to the country, then the solution must be through policy change internally. You cannot bring in foreign, controlling the foreign trade is not going to be the answer, because that can be sustained. So the point that economic theory has come to is that if the problem is in the domestic economy, the answer has to be through changes in policy in the domestic economy, and not by trying to influence foreign trade or foreign capital flows, because that doesn't get at the root cause. You have to get to the root cause of it. And for example, if you put an import control in order to improve a balance of payments, you could not then forget the fact that increase in import price is a tax on exports also. Why? Because they are both operating in the same market, getting labor and capital that is competing for it. So when you make import substitutes more profitable, resources travel to that area, starving non-tradable goods like electricity and exports. So we have to be very careful about policy, that when it's very appealing to reduce imports, but the impact of it on exports is not appreciated, because at the end of the day, international trade is a macroeconomic problem also. It's macroeconomics. If you do something one side of the economy, that will impact on the other side of the economy. And I don't want to use the term, it's called the Lerner theorem. Abba P. Lerner, a night school student at University of London, saw this and wrote a paper became known as the Lerner theorem. That is, a tax, import duty is a tax on exports. So if you want to increase exports at the same time, nobody is against, good economists are not against import substitution. Not against, certainly not. And people who understand it have missed the point. You can make both profitable, socially profitable, by people investing in import substitutes on the one hand, and on doing exports on the other hand. Ideally, although this is the theory that we have come to because of the work of Douglas Baggers and Ann Krieger of the 1978 for what is called for the American, sponsored under the American research group, that found that the ideal situation is where the return to import substitution is equal to return for export promotion. So when they are balanced, then you are in the optimum area. When they are not balanced, so if you tax people in order to increase exports, it doesn't work that way. You have to have a return to both of them are close to equal or close to equal is the best allocation. So that is where you are optimizing your output also in the GDP also in that way. Actually, it gives us, as I said before, a very interesting experiment, because the economists can't do physical experiments like what you do in a laboratory or a physics lab. So we had to watch what has happened in the world and interpret it in a way, in a good scientific way, to see what is the so-called natural experiment that took place. So we had such a good experiment between 77 and 78 to say 94, shall we say. So 78 to 94, they liberalize the economy, by which we mean they allow prices to allocate goods and services. Not a bureaucrat sitting in air conditioned, if I remember, 10th floor, deciding what people should import, export, consume, not consume. Is done through the market. Now, market is not always right. There are places where the market won't work with. What I call non-rival goods, there are price of public goods that only the government can provide, defense, police services, disease control. Government should be involved at the middle of it, no problem there. So, so between these two periods, you see higher growth rate, but more important than the higher growth rate, long-term growth is assured through the rise in productivity, increase in productivity. So we saw that period the economy growing very fast, productivity increasing, but something happened after sort of 89. There was another little liberalization in 89. After that, the people who were running the country at that time started Mahavali, which we should have done, no doubt, but maybe it came too early for us. And so that because of the price increase, cement and all those prices went up, then it again, while we were liberalized the economy, allowing the market to allocate, we interfered in a way that reduced the rate of return. Although Mahavali should have been done, electricity is very important, it should not have happened as fast as it happened, because they reduced a long-term, over 20-year program to few years, and then those prices, relative prices changed, and the impact of the liberalization sort of frittered away. Actually, it is not what I recommend. It is that in the literature now people have agreed on. It comes from the work of very famous economists, looking at very definite countries, specific countries. The famous project that are run by the National Bureau of Economic Research out of United States. They, Jagdish Bhagwati and Anne Krieger, looked at this area of especially trade, because trade is very important, especially for a small country like ours. We cannot hope to do very well in the world if we don't engage with the rest of the world. We have to do trade. We should invite people to come and invest here. So my first thing would be to say, to do two important things. First of all, make sure that the macroeconomic situation in this country is stable, by which I mean inflation does not exceed the rest of the world. Okay? We try to keep inflation to our rest of the world, if not possible, to our major trading partners, number one. Number two, then we have what is called a sustainable balance of payment situation. So, but we are not today in that situation, in the sense that we have a huge debt that we have to repay. It's not easy, it's a difficult thing. Any government confronting that will have to deal with it. And there are countries that have done that in the past, in countries in recent past. Guyana had a 800% debt to GDP ratio. And the work of the IMF and the World Bank and others together the Latin American Development Bank worked together and helped them. How did they help them? By saying we are going to mend our ways, we are not going to repeat policies that led to such an accumulation of large amount of debt. But we will be able to help you if you indicate that you are going to change your policies, so that we be able to give some little more accommodation to get rid of the problem that they are facing. So my idea would be to say what is the actual situation in the countries, right? If you will understand, this government, for example, our government inherited most of these problems. Then we had COVID. So there must be a way of accepted way of going forward. Now what we talked all this time helps to this situation. Have a real return to import substitution and export promotion must be close to each other. Or that is, they use a different concept, the exchange rate in terms of the converting the goods into goods for import substitution and for export must be in a similar, close to each other, if not equal. Equal is even better. So that is the first thing I would say. I will say give confidence to the market, saying we are taking care of it this way, and explain how we are going to do it. I would say, and a lot of people are saying that go to the IMF, not for the money. It's not the money, but the discipline, that the signal we are giving to our creditors now and future creditors, that we are going to have a program in which there is a responsible ability to deal with the situation that we are confronting. Our reserves are not high enough, as I see it, to pay off our debt and in a sort of an organized way. Of course, we also know one Monday morning they are not giving you your bill and say, here's what you have to pay. No, we have to pay upon the way at our tenor of our borrowings. In the past, it's sometimes in this year, unfortunately, there's a bulge. So for that, we have to be careful about getting people. Then you can do swaps and all that. But for a medium term listing group, that is only a short term thing. For medium term, we have to change the incentive structure. So not only keep the macroeconomic situation stable, balanced through avoiding inflation and having a sustainable balance of payment, current account situation, but change our incentives. Our incentives are not well aligned in our situation. So get relative prices to begin to work. In other words, it's sometimes difficult at this time to say to do reform, but we have to reform. We have to give a program, this is what we are going to do, and people will come. Private enterprises will see what the government is going to do, and they will change their behavior in a way that is going to be good for them, therefore good for the country also. And so that's what I would do. I will say a program of recovery. We will have well understood, well agreed upon program of recovery. Let the politics get out of the way and say anybody coming into power, or now as in power, should address these issues. Nobody can be free of that now. So I would say macroeconomic stability, incentive reform, and inform people a very well understood program of recovery for the economy. Actually, as economists, one of the things we can use is do comparative studies. So, for example, why did Taiwan grow as a magnificent rate in the 1960s, 70s and became the low income or developed country? And that is exactly what Vietnam is doing. I have done a lot of work on Vietnam. I have been there many times. They said what we are doing is not good. Now we are going to change it, and they did. So we helped, meaning when the World Bank helped to enter the World Trade Organization. The main leader of the negotiation with the WTO, we were helping the Vietnamese government at that time, Actually, they are very good at getting something done. And so they said, actually, when I met later after that reform, he said, you know, Sarath, we should have done even more. We should have gained even more. Because now they are comparing with China. Because what happened to China, real wages have gone up. Certain goods China cannot produce at lower cost than Vietnam now. And Vietnam became magnificent. I mean, Vietnam became second largest coffee exporter in the world from nothing, right? Then, I mean, growing very fast. Second in rice production. And industry, most of the foreign direct investment now going to Vietnam. How did certain industries that were functioning lose out because of liberalization? We are given the example of steel corporation, and you are given fabric tool area. Two very good questions. The answers are not very difficult. Steel, if we could produce steel at competitive prices, then we can export. We have no problem. The thing is that there was no hope we can do it, because first of all, the technology we had is so old. So it costs so much in order to produce what the world market bears for steel, period. Some countries have done it, I mean, because they have the technology, they have the people to do it, and believe it or not, it's not in the government. Look at China, India steel industry is about at least 200 years old, but they are still going on. I mean, they had very good Tatas started, and so we are not in that league. My feel is that we could never make steel competitive given our situation. So steel, unfortunately, live much longer economic life because it had support from the government. Suppose it was not a government enterprise, steel would not have lasted maximum maybe 3 years. Now it's a lot of some 50 plus, if I am right? That is the enterprise we are talking about, state-owned enterprises. Sometimes it's very important to realize that capitalist system which we have is a profit and loss system. Losses give an equal message like profit. Profit says you can do it, you can sell it, you can increase the scale, you can do various improvements. But losses tell you, hey, this is not something you can continue to do. Somebody has to bail you out each year, and doesn't make any sense to continue. What do we do? When we sustain these things, much over their time, they are really taxing the economy. That we could build 3 schools, 5 hospitals with the money that we have paid for these enterprises that could not survive on their own. So that's very rural textile also similar case. Then the thing is that look at our textile industry outside. Look at we are world leaders in textile technology. Mars and Bandai, they are very well recognized. They have revolutionized the way of making garments and things. For example, they are introducing textile technology for shoes, and there are 5 places around that they are really invested and teaching the same technology, and they have places in Mexico, they have places in Cambodia, in Vietnam, other places. So what is the difference between the two? Same people, we went to same schools, difference is the ownership. Now they have at one stage, public some financial institutions like the World Bank also believe that ownership does not matter. They have learned a lesson. When I joined the World Bank, they were thinking, I said, what? It doesn't matter. I said, it never matter for what? Well, if you want to make profit, it matters, because there is you want to survive. If you are a private enterprise, you want to get a return on the money that you have borrowed most of the time, and so therefore you do the best you can. If, for example, the decision to continue with a dead duck institution enterprise, remember the poor workers are also lose their jobs. even when that decision is made by people who are not affected by it, then it's a bad situation. I think the work that Jagdish Bhagwati and Anne Cricket did in 1978, they wrote 2 books on the same topic, taking different areas. 1978, published by, I can't remember the name, but if you put these 2 names, there will be a huge list of books that they have written. Among them, there is this project, what is called the National Bureau of Economic Research Project on International Trade. Very good book. Then you can read Anne's latest book called What Everybody Should Know About Trade. It is a fantastic book. I got a chance to look at it in draft. I told her, you have a real winner here. She said, no, don't. So it's very simply, only she can do explained what we have just discussed. Actually, I don't have hard copy. She's supposed to have send it to me, but I haven't got it. That happens here, you know. That happened, unfortunately. So I had downloaded through Amazon. I have already did 6 of the chapters. I had another 6 which I'll read to this thing. It's a very good book. Then you can read, for example, people like Bella Balassa, who's unfortunately no more, I.M.D. Little, people who have Max Gordon. Those are the books that really change the way we have looked at it. But look at what happened in the world. Look at the countries that are doing so well. People who gave up the whole industrial policy. China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines now, and all these countries, that we were doing better than all those countries when we got independent in the 1950s. We kept figures for national income only after 51, 52. We were only second in the world after Japan, and maybe closely followed by Malaysia. So our position is different today. Today, most of those countries have incomes that are closer to the rich country, developed countries. So we waste a lot of time. One of the things is our politics also, because we are a democracy. We remain a democracy. We have what late Professor Indraratna used to call Tattu Maru system. That is, one government in power, and with the 5 years, and other government comes, just something opposite, something different. So we have no consistent policy throughout, unfortunately. None of these are constraints for us. There's other opposite question I want to answer, saying that some countries have what is called curse of resources. Because of the curse of resources, a country like Nigeria is in real trouble. Country that huge oil resources are get into huge trouble. We don't have that problem, you know, because we are small, number one. I think you know that I be playing rugby, that to be quick is the thing, not the weight, right? So we have to be understanding the markets, world markets, and working with it. Actually, we have no constraint that way, in my belief, because I can cite so many examples. You know, small countries are doing so well because they have been moving with the pressure, they have studied the situation. So other thing is that what has happened, and our friend Dr. Professor Atukorala is the real world-class expert on it, is that because of the fragmentation production, nobody produces final good anymore. So we can produce, I think I may have said this before, we used to produce, I don't think we may do, the rubber band for the wiper is the BMW. I love BMWs. And I used to tell people, hey, we produce parts of this car, right? That because we specialized in it. We didn't try to produce a car. But now we want to produce a car, which is so silly. Because we can get, you know that what is called, if you want to assemble cars, that is what we do here. Why do people assemble cars? Because we have 300% duty. A car that is, say, $15,000 in the United States, where there are low tariffs, the United States tariff on a car is 3%. right? 3% compared to our 300%. So when we buy a car for $10,000, shall we say, for the sake of argument, that is going to be 4 times more, because 3% at 4 times more. So we don't be silly for us to try to produce cars, but we can produce so many things for the car. We are good at it. Like that thing, parts of thing. There's a Sri Lankan guy, the famous man who produced software and chips that he takes in a suitcase to Japan, and is worth $30 million or something, right? So there are people who can do it. They should have the opportunity to do it. So size is no barrier. As a fast-moving game, to not introduce constraints to it. Give the people the freedom to make those decisions following what is called policy towards industry rather than industry policy. Industry policy, you create a Ministry of Industry, they want to produce things. There's no proper evaluation whether it is going to win or not. Now, if you did a proper evaluation, I can tell you myself, for the evaluation of motor car assembly is one of the worst activities we can ever do. Why? Because we don't have the competence, we don't have the material. We have to import what is called CKD, completely knocked down vehicles. They cost more than a full car. If you can buy the car full at cost prices, as world prices, will be much less than the CKD. That's all known, well known now. Now, just because we can tell people, oh, we are producing a car here, how much resources we are using? The resource costs are very high compared to the importing the car. So I see great opportunity opening to us. We are well-educated population. Our kids are smart. They can need little bit hand-holding, and they can come out to be, can be a very well-developed country if we are prepared to bite the bullet and make the changes that need to be changed. Actually, I want to pretty stark about it. Without reform, we have no future, period. Let's be grown up and say we have to bite the bullet and do. I would come out and say, go back to the earlier point, that we have a recovery program where people, reasonable people from either side of the spectrum can agree this is what we should do. Look at around you, look at around you, and you will see the country that didn't have anything. For example, what is the resources that Singapore has? Nothing. Population, educated population, very friendly to foreign direct investment. Maybe Singapore you can call an exception, but I have worked in many poor countries in the world that came from nowhere to be very well. Vietnam is a very good example. War-ridden, very low level of per capita income compared to us, come up now past us. Now it's about $8,000 to $9,000 per year compared to our just before COVID $4,003 per capita. It's fallen now, obviously, because of the problem that we have. So I am very optimistic because I have seen countries going from more difficult situation than what we have had and doing very well because they understood the situation, they got help from the rest of the world to help them. Because if we say we are going to do these things and people looking around the world see there are opportunities for them to come and locate here. We have two large zones. We can have Colombo City project, the Hambantota project, and make use of this. In Hambantota project, anybody can invest. Chinese, Australians, Brits, Americans, anybody can invest here. So you'll have to get rid of that. Yeah. So I am very hopeful with proper way. It should be actually we have no alternative. We have no alternative. It's easy to make decisions when there is no alternative. There is nothing to weigh here. It's pretty obvious the alternative is to promise people, we are going to tell our creditors. This is what many Latin American countries did when they really got into much bigger hole than us. They came and said, the Argentinians as well, because they have huge resources, unlike us. They said, we are going to change our ways. They got very good people running the country after that. They were able to come back. Of course, they are again going in another cycle, that's another thing. Though there are countries who have been our states and done very well because they identified the problem, they have a consensus, this is the program that we should do, and we do. We have no other choice. We have no other choice.